Now?
George, could you sit down here at the table?
Yeah, George, how about just...
Try it now, Jean.
Now?
Okay, now. I told George I had never spoken when one of these things worked, and so then I saw to it that it didn't. Okay. My name is Jean Peterson, and I'm Vice Chair of the Board for Youth and Shelter Services Incorporated here in Ames. To all of you who are just joining the conference, I'd like to say welcome. It's been very good to be here so far, and will continue to be so, I'm sure, as we hear from tonight's speaker, and participate tomorrow in the workshops and in a dialogue with our legislators. And to all of you who didn't see TV at 6 o'clock, a lot of you were on, and you're going to be on again at 10, so be sure and look. We're getting very good press coverage. Serving on the board of Shelter House has been a really rewarding and educational experience for someone like me who has no professional qualifications in social work or psychology and no experience in working with young people outside my own family and their friends. Being here today among all you professionals has been very exciting. I'm learning a lot, some of which will, I hope, help eventually percolate out and help to educate others who aren't in the professions, and result in an ever-increasing broad base of community support. George probably feels from time to time that he has all the support he needs already, but he leads us in the paths of righteousness and makes us feel needed most of the time, and that we need all of you who really work with the kids. There is no doubt whatever. I want to introduce you now the special guests of the evening. First of all, Phil Smith on my left, who is the State Youth Coordinator out of the Governor's Office. Why don't you stand up, Phil? I guess maybe they can see you. You're high and they're low. Okay. And Kathleen, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name. Is it Nalen? Kathleen Nalen, who chairs Iowa's Juvenile Justice Advisory Council. And Iowa, I understand, is one of the few states that has one. And Jim Gould, who is the Juvenile Justice Specialist for the Regional Office of LEAA in Kansas City. Then on my right, Al Way, who is Executive Director of the Iowa Crime Commission, and Al will introduce our speaker of the evening.
Thank you. I hope everything today and tomorrow is very beneficial to most of you, and take back some of George's ideas and at least look at some of his accomplishments in the past few years and try to put them to use in your own communities. While in the past few years, more and more emphasis has been directed towards the juvenile offender, since probably in a few years down the road, that juvenile offender has a great potential for becoming tomorrow's adult offender. This growing emphasis has not been misdirected in any way whatsoever if criminal justice practitioners have any serious aspiration of reducing crime and improving the system in the future. The Iowa legislature is concerned about the treatment of the juvenile and will be discussing a proposed code revision this next session. There has also been a growing concern from the national level, which led Congress to pass the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act in 1974. With the passage of any federal financial assistance program, we at the state and you at the local levels can expect guidance from our federal counterparts. Sometimes not exactly what we like, but in most respects to the benefit of everyone. And in this specific situation, it's with great pleasure tonight that I have the privilege to introduce the Director of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Administration, which is the juvenile justice arm, the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, located within the Department of Justice. In addition to his present responsibility, Milt Luger has served as Deputy Director and Director of the New York State Division for Youth for a period of 14 years. and in doing had the authority for state facilities serving youth placed by the family court in New York. He is also a past president of the National Association of State Juvenile Delinquency Program Administrators, and I has also been a consultant to the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and the Administration of Justice. In 1973, his work and leadership throughout the country was acknowledged by the National Council of Crime and Delinquency, and so being acknowledged was awarded the Roscoe Pound Award for his work in crime control and delinquency prevention and treatment. It is with great pleasure that I now introduce to you Mr. Milton Lugar.
After an hour and a half of cocktails, I'm not going to take too much of your time. I know you'd rather either get back to them or go to sleep or something. I must say that when Alan wrote to me, asked me about the possibility of coming out to Iowa, I had mixed emotions about coming out here. For those of you who don't know what mixed emotions consist of, it is when you see your daughter come home with the Gideon Bible under her arm. Don't laugh, that happened to me. I had mixed emotions because I didn't know whether I could get out here without flying Allegheny Airlines. And I was happy to find out that it wasn't necessary, and I had a viable option, Ozark Airlines. There have been a lot of jokes about Ozark Airlines, but I want you to know that I heard very recently that they are buying a Concorde. They are. And they're going to be flying directly between Des Moines and London with intermediate stops at Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, and Elkhart. The topic at hand, people, and what I'd like to really wrap with you about is sort of like the work of our office, as it might be of some assistance to you. And some of my perceptions, if you'll bear with me, about young people in the system, where they're coming from, what they believe in, what their perceptions are, and some ways that maybe we've sold them short and haven't really met their needs, and some ways we might together, and us bureaucrats in Washington and you folks on the trenches and the firing lines might work together to make the system a little more sensible and a little bit more relevant and meaningful. When you talk, and I've had the privilege, the opportunity, and the headaches, I guess, of working with a lot of hard-nosed kids around, mostly in New York, and we have some of the best hoods in New York City. And being responsible for a lot of facilities that made them worse rather than better. And I acknowledge it, despite the hard work and a lot of good things that turned out for youngsters as well. And I could show you take the tattered letters out of my inside pocket and show you the thank you letters and the letters from kids who said that you turned my life around and so on. And they're happily married, and they're paying taxes, thank goodness. And they're doing a lot of very fine things. But let me say this, that those letters are not the preponderance of our experiences or representative of too much of our experiences with young people who have been known to the juvenile justice system. And while those letters are great strokes every once in a while for us, there's some sort of an uneasy feeling on the part of a lot of us who devoted our lives to the juvenile justice system that we haven't been as effective and relevant as we would like to be. And when we talk with young people, or listen to them, that's even better than talking at them or talking to them, which we're wont to do. When we listen to them, they tell us some very quick, basic, hard-hitting things. And we'd better listen to this. Let me just get this aside for a moment. They say to us that the system that we've set up to them doesn't really listen to them at all, but lectures to them in a very didactic, overbearing, moralistic way. And although I guess we should understand that kids learn more through examples and through emulation than through all of our tutoring sessions and all of our 50-minute hours, although we should recognize that, we don't practice it very much. And so we run lines on them, we tell them why and how they should shape up and be grateful and listen to us and pay attention and do this and do that and so on. But we don't listen very much to their hurts and their despair and their feelings of hopelessness and emptiness. And they tell us that, or they feel that. They tell us that, you know, the system itself and those of us in the system really don't care very much about them, because if we really cared about them, we really were concerned about them, we'd listen much more to them. And we're paid to work with them. And there are paychecks, and that's why we are, you know, into being in this system. That's their perception of us for the most part. I guess because down deep, even among the hard-nosed of them, because down deep they feel so empty and they're filled with such self-hatred, so many of them, they can't understand why anybody would be interested in them. And so, you know, you couldn't be interested in them, so you're only there because you're paid to be. So you don't care and the system doesn't care. And they say that the system discriminates too. You know, and they're right. They say, you know, I know other guys who had a few more bucks, or families who knew somebody who had some influence, and they didn't end up in the training school the way I did. Or they didn't even end up in court the way I did. And that's true too. We'd better acknowledge it. The rich get the psychiatrists and the poor get the training schools in America. And it's hard to really talk to kids about morality and fairness and even-handed treatment and so on when that's a reality of how we've handled them. And they say that the system double talks them too. Talks to them about the programs that they are offered being voluntary, but if they don't participate, some report is going to go to the judge. Or they talk about some diversion program being strictly voluntary, but if the kid doesn't participate, the original charges are put into practice again, or charges are brought against the kid again. And so there's a lot of, you know, what are we really doing? And they say also too, just quickly on this part, they also say too that the system itself doesn't have much dignity. The institutions, and I'm not talking about the ones in Iowa, I haven't seen them, frankly. What I hear about the juvenile justice system, frankly, in Iowa, is that it's a lot of years ahead of others. I say that not to butter you up, and not to be obsequious, just the reality of your having passed laws some years ago that some states are just starting to get around to pass, as far as what you can do with status offenders, how you must keep them separate and apart from adults and things like that, which other states are just contemplating now. But, you know, that aside, most in the United States, most of the juveniles say your system, you know, doesn't have any dignity, because too many of the institutions are run with leftover surplus equipment. Everybody else's hand-me-downs. Your courts are overcrowded. The judges don't have time to really spend on cases. They're harassed. Probation officers run around with folders full of unrelated papers all over the place, don't have any time, too much time to really sit and work with kids or be his advocate or be his confronter. It's a matter of reporting, you know, every couple of weeks or so how you're doing for 10 minutes. Too much of that around the United States. And because that's at play, the kids feel that the system doesn't respect itself. And so why should I respect it? And that's, again, something we should think about. Now, what about the people? You know, why have these impressions come to be felt by young people? And let me just spend a bit of time before I get down to the work of our agency, if I might, people. It seems to me that one of the basic problems that we have as far as institutional operations go, shelter care, detention, probation, and so on, is that the system itself has been given a lot of mixed signals by the general public as to what's expected of them. And generally speaking, people, especially those who work at institutions or work in with some sort of a controlling mandate about young people, they don't know what the devil is expected of them because of these mixed emotion, I should say mixed signals given to them by the public and by their bosses and by the politicians and by the state legislators and so on. They don't know, for example, if they're working in an institution, whether their duty is simply to stop abscondances, stop potential sodomies, stop embarrassing headlines, whether that's their responsibility first and foremost, or is it really to work on changing attitudes and turning around the attitudes and the heads of young people? They really don't know. Unless we clarify that, we're still going to be getting a lot of mixed up people trying to work with kids. Because in very many ways you can't have both. If your first priority, if your boss tells you that you're not going to get any medals for rehabilitation at all, but let one kid abscond or let one embarrassing headline occur in your facility, then you're going to hear from him. You've got a mindset then that your job is to get an 8-hour quiet tour of duty, and that's your goal. And it's a very short-sighted, unfortunate goal, but maybe it's a realistic one, because that's the expectation sort of given down to you. Somehow or other, that's got to be turned around, because I can't be, if I'm an institutional recreational person, let's say, as an example, or a teacher, I can't be working one-on-one with a kid to teach him a skill. If I'm a recreational person teaching a kid a layup or a jump shot or something like that, I can't be doing that. Or I can't be working with an individual kid on a remedial reading lesson with the painstaking, tedious way that whole operation takes. I can't be doing that if I'm worried that 3 other kids in that class or in that recreational group might be going out the door, or over the wall, or over the fence. Somehow or other, I've got to be told and make it patently clear that my job is to work with kids and not to be aloof from them and watch them. Because unfortunately, most institutions in the United States are run by watching kids, by teaching them conformity, by teaching them mock respect. And we really think that treatment consists of the kids saying, "Yes, sir," and lowering their eyes when we talk to them, and holding us in that kind of respectful fashion, which is such nonsense. They just go out a little bit more hostile than the way it came in. So somehow or other, we've got to get loyalty down to the institutional operational people so that the main thrust will not be on simply conformity and control. Sure, control, a degree of it is necessary, but not at the expense of working with kids in a beneficial fashion. I think, and I'm being negative, and rightly so, people, for a period of time. I want to be a little bit more hopeful a little bit later on, but I want to paint some of the problematic things that I see. First, the business of why youngsters have those perceptions and why people in the field are struggling to meet what they feel are their responsibility is more than just the ambivalent signals. The reality, too, is, as I would see it, is that despite the fact that there are a lot of decent, well-intentioned, hard-working people in this field, there are a lot of people who shouldn't be in the field at all. And I would even say there are probably a lot of agencies that shouldn't even be in the field. There are a lot of people making bucks off kids. They're engaged in a lot of fiscal rip-offs. Child care has become a big money-making operation, and that's what they're into. And somehow or other, we don't have the accountability to really look at that in a very hard-nosed and clear and precise fashion. We don't have it because we are so desperate. We're so desperate for panaceas and for silver bullets that we're ready to go along with, very often, anybody who will say, "I'll take care of your problem kids, send them to me." Those are the kind of people that Ken Wooden was talking about earlier today, the money makers of kids, the ones that'll take your problems and run up the side of kids' heads to control them. Sure, the kids will be quiet and they'll be out of sight and out of mind and out of trouble as far as we're concerned. but they'll come back that much more hostile, bitter, full of rage. Somehow or other, the business of having that scrutiny upon people in the field has to be enhanced through ombudsman programs, through an outraged citizenry, through maybe investigative reporters, hopefully through juvenile justice advisory groups, that they will look very carefully at where the money is going and not settle for the kind of puff pieces or public relations pieces that that have been called research in the past. Another problem that we have that's rampant in the field is the business of rivalries. Somehow or other, again, we seem to always be finding enemies to battle when we really should be cooperating and working on behalf of kids. And so you see probation people battling with institutional people, and parole people complaining about the institutional people, and the police complaining about the judges, and the judges complaining about lack of resources, and everybody's blaming the school system. Everybody's stabbing one another. It's like a Shakespearean play, really, a Shakespearean tragedy. Everybody stabs everybody else to the right. You know, at the end of the play, everybody's lying on the ground dead, and somebody delivers the epilogue. The kids deliver the epilogue while we stab one another. And you have the same thing when you come to the public versus the private sector. It's really sad and it's lamentable. There's enough misery to go around for all of us. But it's really sad, and I've seen it in New York State and other places, in which the private and the public sector are at odds with one another not in a respectful tone towards one another. The private sector looks with condescension towards the public sector. They won't take the kids that go to the public sector. They screen out those difficult kids, but they still look down their noses at those who would try to deal with those very same tough kids. And the public sector are outraged at the fact that they think the private sector will not help with the real problem cases. So again, it's a way of how can we overcome that, because it is only when, I believe, these young people see a mutually respectful, uniform way to approach them by people who have respect for one another, can they feel that they can stop, trying to manipulate among the cracks within, the united front that should be presented. Now, all this, might well sound like a bleak picture, but I don't think there's too much in the field that we should take a lot of pride in. Sure, there are individual good programs. You might be working with some of them. I can point out I've heard about the Des Moines program, in the past, the diversion programs and so on, alternatives. And I'm sure that there are darn good ones, but I'm talking about across the United States, to take a broader view. There isn't too much we should be happy about, and there's a long way we have to go. Now, what are we trying to do to be of some help in our own office? Obviously, Congress, in its wisdom, in its infinite wisdom, was definitely not satisfied with recidivism rates, with growing violence on the part of kids, with uncoordinated, uncooperative federal agencies trying to deal with one another. It was estimated, for example, that some 117 different federal programs, spending up to $20 billion a year, had some relationship with juvenile justice and delinquency prevention in the United States. And most of them didn't know what the next one was doing. They just, they were building their own turf and not cooperating with one another, not even talking to one another. So what Congress said in creating our office is that they wanted to have a focal point to rally around and get a cooperative stance and a cooperative approach started. And so we have, for example, a federal coordinating council now, in which HUD and Labor and HEW and NIDA and a lot of us sit together and try to plan consonant policies. We have found amazing things, like one federal agency's policy is diametrically opposed and counterproductive to another agency's federal policies as far as youth services are concerned. And we're trying to straighten out some of those things. And also, the law itself as we got it, and the mandates imposed upon us to implement, talk to the things you're very much concerned with in this conference. The notion of trying to, within 2 years, deinstitutionalize status offenders from correctional institutions, to keep them out of secure detention, to separate youths from adults in local jails. And you're into that, and I sincerely congratulate you for that kind of worthwhile endeavor. There's too much learning about crime rather than turning away from crime in most of these institutions. But what we're trying to do is, that's one part of the responsibility. I'm happy to say that Iowa has been, through Allen, eligible for, in the process of gathering close to $700,000 in the last couple of years from us to further those goals and those aims. And we hope that as our program expands, we'll have even more resources available to you, fiscal, technical assistance, and so on. But the responsibility, and I think what we should all be into, is even broader than just the detention and the shelter care. There are a whole host of other problems that we're planning, what we call our special initiative programs around. Let me try to explain this one thing, people. We have two big pots of money, or we have, one big pot of money which comes to us, like let's say the $75 million appropriated for the year. We can split it up into what we call our discretionary grants and our block formula grants. The block formula, 75% of the money goes immediately to the Allen Ways of the world to be planned with, to work with you closely on, with close cooperation and input from the Kathleen's, who will have a lot of input as to how that juvenile justice money shall be spent in his or her state, and that's beautiful. That citizen input has been so badly lacking in the juvenile justice field in the past, literally across the United States. There has not been a constituency for these young people, and this is one of the reasons why the juvenile justice advisory groups working closely with the SBAs and Allen will put on course where those monies should be spent. That's 75% of our money. 25% of our money we retain for our discretionary grants and our discretionary initiatives. Now, for example, the first one, about a year ago, we put out some $13 million that had to do with deinstitutionalization, to try to help states deinstitutionalize in addition to our block money. And we're very, very carefully researching the discretionary grants that we gave in this area. For years, action money was put out, and then later on, down the pike, researchers were put on to justify the expenditures. And invariably, the researchers would say, well, you didn't have the right hypothesis, you didn't even collect the correct data, you have an unresearchable program here. And so we can't tell you how you did. We don't know the program effectiveness. And so what we have done in connection with all of our discretionary grants is to set up a procedure where the researchers are put on the same time that the action grants are awarded. And then we expect and demand that the researchers sit with the action people in working out goals, in working out approaches, in working out those items that can be researched, so we'll have the data. And I've told those, and I hope that Iowa and Allen and Kathleen will be heavily involved in seeking our discretionary grants. But let me tell them this one thing right up front. If you get a discretionary grant from us, and I'll mention some of the other areas we're going to be going into and awarding money for, I don't give a darn if every one of the discretionary grants fails, the action program fails, as long as we learn something from it, as long as we don't keep throwing those hundreds of millions of dollars out and not really having hard data to evaluate what we've done. This has been the curse of not only, of many, many, many federal programs along the way. And so we're trying to build a knowledge base through our discretionary grant approaches, to have that process plus incidence of recidivism, a lot of other important issues plumbed through research. And if we get that, and we know why we failed, that to me is more important and more relevant than having some puff piece written about how great the program went, when it really didn't go that way to justify expenditures. We're going to be going into areas such as in the very near future, and we're drawing up the guidelines for them right now, things like gangs. There's an emergence, and there's been a burying of the gang problem in the United States. You're lucky if you don't have one in this part of the country. But the Los Angeles, the large urban areas, it's been pointed out to us through some of the research that the gangs are there, and they're enormously more powerful because of the firepower that they have. They look down their noses at Saturday night specials. If they don't have 38s and 45s, you know, you're nowhere as far as they're concerned. And they've taken over schools and terrorized students and teachers to the extent that some of them can't eat there. And extortion is the, you know, run of the mill kind of operation. So we're going to be doing something about gangs, working with them, trying to turn around to positive things, co-opting in many ways their powers. There's going to be another initiative in the area of violent offenders. We're doing something about status offenders. We're doing something about the intermediate kind of youngster. But the violent offender is somebody that we know very little about. He's been shunted back and forth between mental hygiene departments and juvenile justice systems. We can't predict dangerousness or violent offenses in kids. There are too many false positives that come out as we try to do this. But who are these kids, and why do they act the way they do? We've gotten some clues. In New York, I was telling some folks, we did a research study of juvenile murderers. We found that invariably diversion is another thing that we've announced our latest round of discretionary grants for. Again, we've pledged some $13 million, $8 million out of this year. That's going to be how to keep youngsters from penetrating further into the system. Because the research tells us the further they go in, the more likely it is that they'll remain in the system. The more likelihood they'll end up in the adult systems. So how can we select those youngsters who should be diverted and divert them and handle them in an alternate way? Restitution programs is another initiative we're going to be going into soon. How to get youngsters in contact with the victims and to make restitution through community services or through actual repayment. There's going to be a delinquency prevention program announced very soon in the area of the capacity building for national youth agencies who want to work with their own constituencies, such as YMCAs, Boy Scouts, boys clubs, a whole series to build up the tolerance levels and the capacities of those local affiliates to deal with kids who are known to the juvenile justice system. Unfortunately, too many of the national youth agencies were not ready to or capable of dealing with kids in the system. Kids who mocked up the walls, kids who appeared ungrateful, kids who challenged and questioned some beautiful structures were turned out. We want to, and they're very anxious to work with us on this, to build up their capacity to deal with these youngsters. Learning disabilities. We just awarded some money to the National Association of Children with Learning Disabilities to do an intensively researched project in 3 parts of the United States, which would plumb the remediation and the incidence of learning disabilities among delinquent kids to see if there's a connection between the two. School violence. We've given some $5 million to the Office of Education to do training and build up the capacity of schools to handle violence and involve the kids as well in the decision-making processes. Other initiatives will be alternatives to incarceration, alternatives to traditional educational programs that turn off kids, advocacy programs, those community groups who want to speak up, and legal people, in other words, other groups on the side of kids, and they will be supported by us, and also the upgrading of probation services. If there's any service that has been shortchanged in the last 10 years in the United States, it's been probation services. It really has fantastic potential for doing something meaningful for young people and keep them out of institutions. And across the United States, it's gone downhill. And so we want to give some resources in this area as well. People, I've gone kind of quickly through, probably not quick enough for you, But quickly through some of our things that we're going to be trying to do through the Office of Juvenile Justice, because it's broader than what we're about here. We want to avoid the faddism. We want to avoid the investing in without research in what's happened in the past. We want to build a knowledge base. I would say that in the final analysis, when we would recognize that despite all of our hard efforts, the juvenile justice system itself, whether it be public or private, can't really turn around the whole quality of life of these young people and really make an effective impact upon whether they turn out to be delinquent or not. I mean, you and I, no matter how much we try, no matter if we can run a great probation service or a great institutional operation, we can do very little about things that basically affect young people's lives. The housing that they have, the educational opportunities that they have, the racial discrimination that they face, the lack of a chance to get a job, a meaningful job, a whole host of other things. And so maybe when those other societal institutions sort of start to deal with us in a viable and a productive way, instead of using us as the dumping grounds for the people that they couldn't deal with, maybe then, we'll be able to see some real progress made in who should be and who should be kept out of shelter care and who needs detention and who needs institutions and so on. I think in the final analysis it probably will be that. It's not that our work is less important, it's that we shouldn't really take the whole weight ourselves and feel, worthless when we can't really succeed in that kind of impossible mandate. So, I would just say that for as long as you want me to be up here for comments that you might have, reactions or questions, I'll be more than happy to do that. And I just want to say that for more reports we get in Washington, Iowa is really doing some innovative, good things. And I congratulate you on that. And I guess I challenge you as well to keep improving, because we all need that. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Lugar said he would be happy to respond to questions if there are any. I know this isn't a really good environment for asking, but shout and say your name, would you?
My name's John Webb, and there are a couple of things that bother me about LEA policies. I wondered if you could clarify some of those for me. One is that on juvenile diversion monies, and another, my understanding is on juvenile prevention monies that they're coming out guidelines, that they've been gearing towards like a $2 million 3-year grant and giving out 10 or 12 of those around the country, rather than putting out smaller grants and giving a lot of different places chances to be innovative in that process. And that really presses hard on a place like Iowa, because we don't have a New York City or something like that. And in the same line, we run into that problem as far as people don't believe there's a problem in a rural area or something like that. I know when we wrote our task grant that we tried to talk about developing a rural delivery system. Well, the first year they wrote that out and they said, don't do that. And they turned around and said, we want you to be a model project. The second year, and we're supposed to write that into our process. I wonder if you could explain some of this.
Sure. I don't know whether all of you heard the question, but it's the whole issue of is most of our monies, according to our policies, going to larger, more urban, metropolitan areas, and what does this bode for a place like Iowa? We've tried to, frankly, in our discretionary grants, we can't control the block grant monies, the 75% of the monies, but in our discretionary grants, we tried to go across the board pretty much. For example, in the diversion ones, we've got the Indian tribe in South Dakota. We have other areas that are more rural. We have rural counties in Florida, and it's across the board. As a matter of fact, we've been kind of careful to try to get a cross section of both ethnic, racial, rural, municipal, and so on. The reality is, though, that when we talk about high incidences of delinquency, it's mostly in urban areas, and so I think the preponderance of the bucks have to go there. It's not that you have less of a problem in a sense, or a less important problem, but the bulk of the population is where the money should flow. One thing that we're going to be doing in order to try to even become more equitable in this regard, we've talked with our juvenile justice advisory people from the region, such as Jim, and they've raised the issue of, and rightly so, there's another pot of money that comes back to LEAA that is not utilized by the states who are not participating in the program. There's some 12 states, I think 12 or 13 now with Hawaii, but they're coming back, and about 5 or 6 are coming back in. But those states are not participating, and so the money through the block grant, which should be available to them, will revert back to Washington. We could put that into the regular discretionary pot, but we've made a decision not to do that, mostly because of what, to try to react to the kind of thing you're talking about. And so what we're going to be doing is splitting up that money into the various regions for the juvenile justice advisory people such as Jim to be able to have small, it'll be a substantial amount of money in each region, but they will have the capacity to respond to some programs which are smaller in nature, more rural in nature, the smaller projects that probably would not emerge in the competition in Washington as being, the most impactful, the most important. So you might have a lot of rural programs or suburban programs around the United States that would take for $20,000, $15,000, make a big difference in that area. But it was not a program that we would want to fund from Washington. But that discretionary pot will be available to our advisory groups, I think, to be more responsive to your concerns. And we hope to be able to put that into place within several months. I see everybody's thirsty. Okay, well, look, you've been patient, and I thank you again.